Welcome to Releasing Your Inner Dragon, where story creators talk story creation. Drake is an award-winning fantasy novelist and creative writing teacher. You can find his epic fantasy series, The Genesis Oblivion, on Kindle Vella. Marie runs a fantasy world-building channel called Just in Time Worlds, and her first book, The Hidden Blade, is available on Kindle Unlimited. We hope you enjoy this episode. Hello everyone, this is a heads up that Drake has been diagnosed with cancer. He has every chance of recovery, however his chemo has interrupted our recording since this is throat cancer. As such, we will be offline during the month of March and episodes should resume during April. Thank you for understanding and see you soon. Hello and welcome to another episode of Releasing Your Inner Dragon with Marie and Drake. Today we're going to do another episode of the writer's journey and focusing again on trials of the writer on your journey to becoming a writer. And today our topic is going to be plot. What happens when it's too thin, how to recognize it and how to deal with it, and what happens when it's too thick and your diamond just goes out and out and out and is never coming back in, and how to deal with that.
This would be that part of the hero's journey where the protagonist is tempted to do something that pulls them off of the path of overcoming the plot. Because that's really what this is. It's the writer being tempted either through just ignorance because they're like, oh, this is fun.
Or prettiness. The prettiness of the world or the plot can be very attractive sometimes. And sometimes it can be super attractive to write the story, which is a really pretty story. But we'll get into so let's start there actually. Sometimes your plot can tempt you. I had this situation recently. I was busy writing the second book and one of my narrating POV characters is on the southern continent, and in the story, she needs to make her way to the northern continent. Now, I did put in some chapters of getting to know her and her current environment, as you know, one should, because you need to kind of get to know the character, right?
And where they come from.
And where they come from, and, you know, the things that shape them, especially since she is not your typical protagonist. This is a woman who is old. She's over 200 years old. Her magic keeps her, you know, looking like a middle-aged woman, but she is old. And she has spent decades reaching the pinnacle of power in the continent. Like she is the equivalent of that continent's pope in their religion, a medieval style pope. So she has a lot of very real power. So there's a lot of complexity that you need to understand about the character. And as part of that, I do a plot line, a very brief plot line in the Holy City, where she's wrapping up some of her political ambitions before leaving to go on this call to adventure that she has now received from the goddess, much to her dismay. So she's wrapping up these plot lines. Now, as I was busy writing it, I summarized the politics. I summarized the negotiations that she's involved in and how she brings that to a successful conclusion for what she wants. And I was tempted. Oh man, was I tempted to write scene upon scene of intense political negotiation in this really pretty city with this intense church politics that interacts with the, you know, more militant power of the kings and how that whole relationship works and the setup around it and the historical influences on it. And I was so tempted. And then I realized that if I do that, I am committing to writing a whole book just about her leaving this city. So either the book that I'm working on is going to be 300,000-400,000 words, or she's not going to arrive at the northern continent in this book, and I have to put my climax of the book somewhere else. And that was the point where I was like, no, we will just summarize this plot. But I think it is very tempting. And I mean, I think that's what happened with George R.R. Martin. I think he gives in to that temptation often, which is why Danny is still back on the other continent, because he goes like, but it would be pretty to write about the undying masters. And it is pretty. I'm not saying it's not, but it's not a core part of the story. And that was the lesson that came to me, was like core story.
Yeah. Well, I think epic fantasy falls victim to this probably more than anything else. I mean, if you're writing a murder mystery, it's like, I've got a detective, he's got to solve this murder, and you're pretty much going to go through it. But epic fantasy has this disadvantage, if you say, of the fact that I just spent months and months and months thinking about this new world and creating all this new cool stuff, and politics and societies and races and intrigue, and all this integral mixing. And it's like, I really want to show this to the readers. I want the readers to see all this just like I have. And they forget that they're not making a role-playing game, they're making a novel. And so they put tons of stuff in there. They go off on Brandon Sanderson's still one of my favorite authors, but in The Way of Kings, there's those chapters, and I am sure they're going to be important at some point. But I'm like, why didn't you give me them when I need them? Like, having one chapter on another continent that has nothing to do with the story, it's kind of just like, why? I don't want to read this.
Yeah. Why am I being pulled away from the story that has my attention to read this?
One of the hardest things to struggle with as a writer, no one loves your story more than you, or at the same level as you. No one loves your characters at the same way. This is where, like, I've run into this with head hopping, where there'll be a scene with 12 characters in it, and every paragraph you're in a different character's head. And when I'm talking to the writer, they're like, oh, but they're all so interesting and they're all so awesome. I just really want to give all that information to the reader. And I'm like, the reader doesn't care. The reader doesn't care about any of your characters except for the one that the story is impacting. That's what they care about. Stop wasting all this words trying to force them to like all the characters as much as you do, because they don't. They like the story. They like readers don't have, when you're reading a story, you're trying to focus on what the interesting part is and everything else. And so when you start getting this ancillary stuff, and the problem is, you could do it if every single one of them was integral to the plot and integral to like the story, and it's all interesting. The problem is what it ends up always being is, did you know that, cousin Louis got syphilis when he was 14? Like, what is that? Okay. What? Why
does it matter?
Right. It's always these weird things that you created in your backstory that kind of shape the way the character is. But like, okay, but this is a romance story between these other two people. Why do I give a crap about cousin Louis's syphilis? Like, how does that come into play? Because it doesn't. It never does. That's the problem. It never does. It's just cool little facts that you created, and you're like, well, I've got to put it in the story because I created it and everybody needs to know it. It's so cool. But we're talking about bigger scale stuff.
Yeah.
Where you go down plot arcs that just don't do anything for your actual story. You said something earlier that when we were discussing this that I really loved. There's a North Star. That's the end of your book. Stop getting distracted and moving off, kilter. Stick to that North Star. You've got to get to the end of that book.
So that's a lesson that I learned from agile development, right? Agile software development, where every 2 weeks you build something, but you only plan 2 weeks in advance. You only plan 2 weeks at a time, which could lead to absolute chaos, right? If you're building a big system, it could lead to unimaginable chaos if you're doing this wrong. But what you have to keep in mind every time that you plan a sprint is that there is a North Star. There is a North Star, a problem that you're trying to solve, a theme that you're trying to show in the case of an author. And so every 2-week sprint that you plan needs to build towards that North Star and not get distracted by this shiny thing over here or pretty little widget that you could build or whatever the case may be. Like, you need to focus on a North Star. As an author, the same thing applies, especially as a pantser author. Mm-hmm. As a pantser author, you have got to think very strongly about that North Star all the time and really consider whether the scene that you're writing, this chapter that you're thinking is so pretty, whether that contributes to your North Star, to your ultimate theme that you're telling. But I think even as a plotter, you can fall into this trap. I mean, we were discussing it from what happened with you guys on the realm.
Yeah. So just to kind of not give a huge amount of details, but it's this big 20 novel thing that I'm writing with these 3 other authors. This was early on. So, I mean, this was like mistakes that we made in the beginning, because we've been working on this since 2019, and we've just really hit our groove and are really writing. And, you know, that's why it's scheduled for a 23 release, because we need, you know, a ton of novels in the can if we're going to, because the plan is dropping a novel every 3 months for 5 years. So we need a bunch of novels already pre-written before we can start dropping them. But early on, I really didn't want to do like this big thing. I wanted to start the whole series because, you know, when you're told we're going to write a 20 novel saga, it's over 3 million words. You feel like that's just this unlimited thing. And so we knew we had 7 races. We knew that we were going to bring them in, you know, with POV characters and introduce them as we went. But we really agreed on this idea that we would start with just this one race in this one capital city, and it's the race that is dominant of this whole area. They're the only ones that have an actual empire. And so we came up with this murder mystery thing and this whole overthrowing of the government, and you know, we have secondary characters. Well, they're primary characters, but for the grand scheme, the big chaos you know, story that we're telling, they wouldn't be a part of that necessarily. Some of them would die along the way or whatever. It was great. And we wrote over 100,000 words on it, like a lot. It's a lot of writing. And we plotted out 2 seasons of it.
Yeah.
Which would have been, you know, 8 novels. So we wrote, just over a novel, and we had 8 novels plotted out. It absolutely was going toward the end game. Absolutely 100%. All of this fed in. And we knew where the end game was. But then I took a step back and I went, you know what, let's take a 10,000 foot elevation route, you know, look down at this. And I started looking at everything, and I realized that even though it was all brilliant and this great story that we were going to be telling, it was going to push us into 25, 30 novels. We weren't going to be, there was so much to this giant rebellion, and so much of season 1 was going to be taken up with just that I was like, oh crap. And plus the big reason why I started looking at it is, and this is my fault, one of the guys had pitched originally, we need to write stories from all these characters' perspectives, but the way he presented it, they were all islands. And for whatever reason at the time, it rubbed me wrong. I was like, yeah, I don't want to write island stories. They've got to come together. And that's why I'm the one who steered us to let's concentrate on this city, this thing. And then as we get deeper into it, we'll start bringing in these others. But then once I took a step back and I was like, oh crap, by the time we start bringing in these other races and other characters, we're going to be in season 3, which is really where the story is going to start. So now instead of 5 seasons, 20 novels, we're going to have 7 seasons, 30 novels.
And the worst part is those 2 seasons that you started with, when readers go from that to the actual story that's beginning, they're going to be like, wait, what? This is disconnected. Because, they are, because think about it, right? You're telling a political story of this empire. Like 2 seasons worth of prologue is what that amounts to before you get to the actual start of the epic tale.
Right. I mean, I simplified it. We actually had the Chaos War story starting at the exact same time as well. That's one of the stories that was always written, and it's not even connected to that. So we saved that. I was just talking about the 100,000, 120,000 words that we threw away.
But that's my point. It's like that. It's ancillary. It's not part of the core plot. Right. Which means you're making the reader wade through 120,000 of not connected.
Actually, it would have been closer to 400,000, but yes.
400,000 words of not connected.
Yeah.
Of what amounts to epilogue and background story, or prologue and background.
Yeah. So we changed gears. We threw all that words away. We plotted. We kept quite a few of the elements that were really, really cool. So basically, it was a whole slave rebellion and a group of nobles that were trying to kill the royal family and take over. But there was so much that was really cool. We kept some of it. We just cut out the stuff that was going to take we completely cut out the slave rebellion, completely cut out this, because you have to spend a lot of time working out why they're rioting and what is their, what's all going on and what are the leaders of that. And, to really explain it, you got to have a POV in there and all this stuff. And so by cutting all that out is what we cut out to just kind of bring it down to just, there's a group of nobles that are plotting to kill the royal family, because we needed that. That is all still kind of needed for what we're doing. But it trimmed it down to now we were able to, because like I said, the real thing is I wanted to bring in the other characters sooner. There's 8 POVs. So the decision was made at that point, okay, let's actually start all 8 stories at the same time, which means no more characters that aren't the characters. So there were going to be 8 POV characters, and then we were going to write how many ever POV characters that we needed to tell these other, you know, like there was a guard captain that had her own story. And it was all really good, and it all flowed. If that was the story we were telling, if we were telling a story of just that, it would have been amazing. Yeah, it just, you have to think about that, and you have to think about how much time you have to actually tell the actual story that you're wanting to tell. And yes, you want subplots, and yes, you want side stories, and yes, you want all this stuff, but you need to be very careful in your decision making and make sure that they do still feed that bigger story.
And when you do side plot, the side plot can't take over the whole story. It can't become an entire book by itself, because then it's not a side plot anymore. Then it's a core plot, and now you have 2 North Stars. At which point you end up with some confused readers who are going, okay, but where are you going to get the story now? How is this going to come together?
Sort of like when you have a main character that has some bodyguards, not that anyone's ever done this, but like you have a main character that has some bodyguards, and you kill off everyone. Literally, you kill off the main characters, you kill off the secondary characters, and you just have this one bodyguard. So for whatever reason, you write an entire novel following this bodyguard. Not that anyone ever do that, because it's really weird. It would be kind of like if you did that.
We're not saying that anybody did that at all.
No. But chapters that I skipped because it's like, why am I following the bodyguard? Although, that being said,
I did like Barristan Selmy. I really did.
Well, but that being said, that just reminded me, one of our favorite authors did that as well, and I think did a pretty good job with it. So in the Guardians of the Flame series, as it went on, you know, main characters do die in that series, but they die because of the, like, they actually complete their stories and then whatever. But toward the end, you're following, you know, some hardcore bodyguards of the old king that was the main character, and they're still not, even though they're pretty good stories and the whole story is about them, they're still not as good as what the Guardians of Flame first 6, 7 books were.
That's also a different thing, right? That's because what Rosenberg did there was those stories were told after the conclusion of the epic saga. The epic saga had been told at that point. It was done. He was now just writing in the world, which is fine. You can do that to your heart's content. And if I like you as an author and I like your world, I will buy every single one of those books. Not a problem.
They're sitting over there on my shelf.
I feel that one needs to be cognizant of what you're doing there. Because if you want to go and tell a story about that, like if I actually really wanted to, I could go and write a prequel about Naira's rise to power, which would be a fascinating prequel after I finish the epic saga.
Right. The other example of, because you're right, we are kind of talking about 2 different things. We're talking about coming up with a whole nother story that's going to take place during the story that you're already writing, versus doing something ancillary, a different novel or whatever. Because another thing that I was going to go down the path was Dragonlance. So Dragonlance was awesome, one of my favorite, you know, ever. And when they started really capitalizing on it, you know, the next saga, which was the Test of the Twins, that was really good.
That was good.
However, while I still read the series when we got to the children as the main characters, they just didn't impact me at the level as their parents. And I don't know if it's that they weren't written as, because this is, you know, one of the weird things about me is I everything that I've read and everything I've consumed in pop culture and entertainment falls into 2 categories: pre-Drake and post-Drake. And because, you know, 20 years ago, I was just a fan. I wasn't writing this stuff. I wasn't studying this stuff. I wasn't preaching this stuff. I wasn't teaching this stuff. And so, my cognizant, grasp of everything that is storytelling is dramatically different now than it was before I was doing this stuff professionally, when I really was just a fan. Unfortunately, all this stuff is pre-Drake, so I can't analyze it with the Drake brain like I can now, unless I was to reread it. But I just still remember that it just didn't impact me enough. So it could be that it's not as well written.
So no, it's the problem is that the children's stories do not pack the same punch as the original stories. They just don't.
That's what I remember.
And I think personally it's because they were spinning it out. You know how sometimes you watch a TV series and you're like, you guys should have ended at season 6. This is season 10, and I'm not sure why I'm watching anymore.
Now you're just writing it for a paycheck.
No, you're just writing for a paycheck.
Yeah.
And it feels like the children's stories were just written for a paycheck. I don't know. Like, there could be people who really like them out there, but I don't think so. Their reviews also aren't fantastic, which is a fairly good indicator.
Well, but the other thing that where I was going to say is, I don't know if it was that, because it's pre-Drake, so I don't remember, I wasn't critical of writing or story or anything like that. But it could also just be that you're pining for the days of old. You're pining for I would rather follow, Tannis and Flint and, all those guys. And why am I following these guys? And so there's that danger too. And that's the same thing with Rosenberg. I don't know if I was pining for the days of old, or if the stories just were not as engaging as the first several with the main heroes. But it just comes down to saying, you still have to think about this. You have to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it.
So that is a different thing. That's a plot that perhaps drags out a little bit too long. Like, what could have been one movie from a children's book became 3 movies. I'm sorry, was it 4 movies? I can't remember how many.
3 for The Hobbit.
Ridiculous. 3 movies.
Which I've actually never seen.
So I don't have the same problem as a lot of fans. A lot of fans have got issues with the Hobbit movies because they brought in elements of the Silmarillion and all. I'm okay with all of that. And I am perfectly accepting of, source material differing from movies, because there are different media, and I get that. The second movie ends with them having a fight with Smaug, and Smaug taking off out of the castle. And the third movie opens with Smaug spending 10 minutes flaming Lake Town and then getting killed in Lake Town. The ridiculousness of ending the movie at that point, and then starting movie 3 with 10 minutes of Smaug, and then he's just dead and no longer in the movie. I'm like,
that seems like that should have been your climax of the last movie.
It should have been your climax in the last movie. That way, this movie could focus on the 5 armies that you want. It's the story you want to tell here.
Right.
It boggles my mind how they came to such a stupid story structure decision as to do that. It completely, I do not comprehend how you sit in a writer's room and go, this is a good idea.
Right. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I say that about stuff that I watch. Stuff that I watch where I'm like, why didn't somebody in the room go, excuse me, this is not smart. This is a bad idea. We shouldn't do. Just think about this. Just throwing it out there. Maybe think about something different.
The Hobbit is actually a good example of the plot in the other direction as well. Because we did say it goes both directions, right? You can go too much plot and tell too much story, but you can also be too thin. And those 3 movies, there was not enough source material for 3 movies in the Hobbit book. They straight up is not. And even if you bring in some elements of the Silmarillion is not a story.
No, just notes.
It's notes. It's a world building book. Yeah, that's not going to work so well.
Right.
So,
but unfortunately, that decision was made for money.
Yeah, and of course, making 3 movies means 3 movies worth of money for the investors, and that's really what. I mean, I get where the decision comes from. I'm just saying there wasn't enough plot. There are parts of them that are really pretty, like the dragon is well done. The visual effects are spectacular. The set is beautiful. some of the acting is really good. Not all of the acting, but some of the acting is really good. But the story is too thin.
Yeah.
There is not enough plot for 9 hours, is the long and the short of it.
Another great example of that, just talking about thin,
Mm.
the latest version of the Stand. They did some really weird things with that. I was literally just talking about this week with a writer friend of mine. The weirdest thing that they did with that is they made one decision, which I always hate, when they go, well, everyone who's watching this has already read the book, so we're not going to put any of the details of that in. We don't need to character build because everybody already knows the characters. We don't need to set up the world situation because everybody already knows what it is. And so they skip all that. And so it was this really weird, like, I don't give a crap about any of these characters now because I hold everything separate. When I sit down to watch something, Dune, I've read the book, I've seen the miniseries, I saw the movie. You're going to drop a new miniseries, I'm coming into it blind. I know nothing. You must give me everything. You must entertain me with this version of this,
of the material.
I'm not bringing anything to it. Screw you. So it's the same thing, that I did with The Stand. Yes, I've read the book. Yes, I've seen the miniseries multiple times, but this is now different. And so because they didn't do any character development at all, I'm like, yeah, I don't care about any of these characters. They can all die. I don't care. But here's the weirdest thing about The Stand. It's really long. I can't remember, 4, 5, 6 episodes, something like that. So 4, 5, 6 hours worth of story, which there's plenty of story to tell. They didn't do any character development. They didn't really even set up the world. They didn't do anything. And so I don't know what they did because they ran out of time and they just were like, well, we'll just blow it up. Like the nuclear bomb that happens at the end comes out of freaking nowhere. There's no setup. So in all of them, you see this crazy guy and you see his development. You see him, be sent off for the nuclear bomb. You see this, you see that, and then he gets crazier and crazier and crazier. So that when he brings the bomb back as a tribute and accidentally sets it off, you're like, yeah, that tracks. And in this new miniseries, it was just like he just shows up at the end. He's like, hey, I'm a crazy guy and I got a nuclear bomb, and it's like, what? So it was just really weird.
Problem sometimes with too thin plots is you've deus ex machina something in. Sometimes the too thin plot isn't that the plot is too thin, it's that you wrote too little.
Yeah.
The Hobbit was a very clear example of too thin plot. There literally is not enough plot for 9 hours.
Well, which is why you end one of the stories when the dragon just leaves the cave.
Yeah. A different kind is where and I will illustrate by means of an example. You have Superman and Batman fighting each other, and they're half killing each other in this huge fight that's been set up between the two of them by a bad guy. And then you have one of them say, my mother's name is Martha. And you go, your mother's name is Martha? My mother's name is Martha. Let's be friends. Okay. You have now written too little. There is plot here. You just haven't communicated it.
Yeah.
Your head book and what has been written down are so far disconnected from each other, they're only related by implication.
Yeah. The weird thing about BVS and that weird, why do you keep calling out my mom's name? What's my mom's name? Wow. Okay. Well, let's just be butt buddies. The problem that happens from that, I think, is because they also wanted to put too much in the story. They have Doomsday at the end where it's like, if they had just concentrated on the North Star. The North Star is Batman has decided that Superman is too dangerous to live. So yes, he's a good guy now, but if he ever goes rogue, he will kill us all. So let me kill him now when he's not expecting it. And they did a great job in the comic series. And so all that's there. But for whatever reason, they made the decision, Snyder made the decision, whatever, to go, that's not good enough. We're going to also have this other big bad threat that's going to come on. And it's like, but you don't need the story that you're telling is so dynamic and so interesting. Come up with the great, either use the comic book and just, it's already written, just use that. Or if you don't want to do that, then come up with your own that isn't, your name is your mom's name is Martha too. Wow. Like, please.
So actually, in a way, it is symptomatic of having too much plot for the capacity that you've got. So you thin down parts of a plot to the point where it's non-comprehensible.
Yeah.
Because it should have been 2 movies. If you
right, because Doomsday is also a great comic thread through there. So we could have had an entire movie off of Doomsday.
We could have had the whole Batman v Superman and then a Doomsday movie as a second movie, and that would have been great. Because
now we have, BVS they've made up, they've Batman has realized, okay, Superman is not going to switch sides or whatever. Although he still keeps the contingency plan anyway. He still was like, but I still learned what didn't work. So I'm still going to have a nuclear option for you because that's who Batman is. And then now they're friends and they can do it, they can fight Doomsday together in this next installment. Whether you're a plotter or a pantser, it really is understanding that the audience is there for, you're setting up the expectations that we're going to go to this conflict resolution. And if you start breaking those expectations, you start going, yeah, we're going here, but first we're going to stop off at the convenience store or my mom's, sort of like, hey, I gotta be the doctor in 30 minutes. Can you pick me up? And your friend's like, yeah, I'll pick you up. And they pick you up and they're like, okay, but on the way to the doctor, didn't tell you this, but I'm gonna stop at, mom's and grocery store and laundry. And it's like, but that's going to take hours. I need to be I got 30 minutes. And that's kind of the thing it is. That's where these authors are like, but I world built this stuff and it's so cool. And I really want to show you this. And I want to show you that. And I want to show you this. And I want to show you that. And it's like, yeah, but
you told me that you are going to tell me this epic story of these characters coming together to save the world. You didn't tell me that you are going to tell me a story of this character conquering this slave city, or this character's dragons getting kidnapped by the undying masters. Because that's storylines that I skip over and I like Martin. I really do. I read Martin's books. I have read the history books. I love his world. And when I reread his books, there are chapters of Danny, who is one of my favorite characters, that I skip over because I'm like, actually, this storyline I could have had it, or I could have left it, and it would have made no difference to my enjoyment of the story. And that's not ideal. That's not what you want.
Yeah.
I mean, you even said it when we discussed Jordan. You said that when a new Jordan book came out, there were chapters that you'd skip because their storyline isn't that strong. And then you'd go back and read them later.
And these are decisions. There's no art here. There's no, oh my God, it's going to be so fun to play in this world, or so fun. These are, what do we feel, understanding our reader base, what do we feel they're going to accept and they're going to appreciate and they're going to want to keep reading. And so we have to make decisions based off of that. And none of that has anything to do with art.
No.
All of that has to do with thinking about your customer.
Yeah.
These are things you have to think about. You have to make these decisions. I'm a plotter. I think about this stuff ahead of time. Yes, even me waste words sometimes, but I very rarely do. Those are definitely exceptions, not the norm. Whereas pantsers, it may be the norm and not the exception, but you still have to do the same process. They're just different ways to get to the same end goal.
Both plotters and plotters have to do it when they're thinking about it and be like, do I include the storyline or don't I? Pantsers need to think about it when they start writing. When your character starts going off the rails and they start doing weird things that are heading into different storylines, it is your character. Like, I do not buy, oh, the character does this. You are the author. If it doesn't work for how the character is set up, change the way the character is set up. It's not real.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the first things that really made me want to do something with you, because I meet very few authors that literally do not behold themselves to anything in the story. All the people that have worked for me, all the people that have trained under me, all the people that, have the one thing that they walk away with is, I don't give a crap about anything. I don't care if it's something I've already plotted. I don't care if it's something I've already written. I don't care about if it's a character I absolutely love and think it's one of the best characters that I've ever come up with. If it doesn't do the task that I need it to do, It's gone.
It's gone.
I change
Gotta
it.
go.
I don't care. I don't care.
It's not real.
Right. Well, the purpose for me is the drama that I'm trying to do, the thematic element that I'm trying to push to the audience. And so if this idea that I had that I was really excited about, that I totally thought was going to do this thing that I'm trying to do, for the audience, if it turns out it doesn't do it, I don't care how much time I've spent into it. I don't care how much work I've put. I don't care how much writing I've done, world building. I don't care. It doesn't accomplish the goal. So let's take a step back, redo it until we learn something. And that's the thing. When you go down the wrong path, you learn what doesn't work. But you also still gain ideas that will work. They just need to be pulled out and put into something else.
There's a great saying in economics, or a great concept in economics. Past investment does not guarantee future happiness. Just because you have sunk time and effort into something does not mean that it's going to work out. It just means that you've sunk time and effort into it. And you need to understand that perspective when you look at a thing and go, does it work for my story? And as a writer, I think that is a very important lesson to learn and to overcome, because it is very tempting to either fall into the too thick or too thin plot.
And I feel like you should be able to see this. I feel like if I was reading the scripts for The Stand, the new one that just came out, I feel like if I was reading that before production, before everything, maybe I'm hired as a director or whatever, and I'm reading through it, and I read the 6 episodes and I get to the end and I'm like, wow, this guy just comes out of nowhere and literally talk about a literal deus ex machina, because God's face shows up in the nuclear cloud. Like, that's literally God in the machine, because it's actually God. Like, I feel like if I had just read that and went, okay, this isn't work. You can't just come out of the blue like this and have this. We have to spend more time. So we're going to have to rewrite some things. We're going to have to cut some scenes because we only have this much. I mean, that's the thing about TV or comics or stage plays or whatever. You are limited in time. Novels, wow, you got a lot of freedom and flexibility. But those mediums that I work in, you've got this much time and it's finite. So if I was going to go say, look, you can't just throw this nuclear bomb at the end and have God's face show up and expect the audience to be satisfied with that. We're going to have to build this story. We're going to have to build this plot arc. Which means we're going to have to cut these other scenes or rearrange things or whatever. And it just seems weird to me that nobody on the production did it.
Some human being read that script and went, yeah, it's fine. We'll just have them like say each other's mother's name and that'll work as like a reason for them not to be enemies anymore.
Because they have to kill Doomsday, which is an entire movie that we're going to shove in the last 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So they have to do that too.
Some human being made that decision. Some human being read that. And then Zack Snyder cut that, right? Looked at the overall product and went, yeah, it'll be fine.
He's actually defended it after that. He said he still says it's one of the best decisions he ever made in storytelling.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
You're a more successful storyteller than I am. I will not deny
100%.
that, counting purely on money. So good for you. But I wouldn't call that a good decision in storytelling, personally.
Right. Me either. And most, a lot of people, I wouldn't say most, but there's a lot of people out there that really hated that they did that and are upset that they did it. But here's the thing. It goes back to what you said. They got distracted by shiny. I'm gonna do a Doomsday battle. That is so much cooler than Batman versus Superman. Even though the entire movie is about that, this other shiny thing is cooler to me. And so that's what I want to focus on. That's where I'm gonna go. I want this shoved in there because it's really cool.
And if you're doing this in a novel, the temptation would obviously be to write 2 novels, right? But what you have to bear in mind with the novels is that flexibility can also be your downfall, because you can also end up with a story that's all diamond going out and never diamond coming in. And you're going to end up with a lot of readers going, you know what, I'm kind of done.
You mentioned that a couple of times, and I know we talked about it in the past, but I do want to go over it. So when you're writing a story, the reason why I like to talk about them as a diamond is because you start at a point, that first word that you open it up with, you then grow bigger and bigger and bigger as you explore the world, add characters, add conflicts, whatever. But eventually, at some point, you have to stop growing and start coming in. So that's your 2 diamond points on the edges. and you're going to come into your finale, which is your top point of the diamond. So, and that's why, like with Game of Thrones and everything, I know you're much more of a fan of Martin than I am, because my big problem with Martin is, even though he's a good writer and a very imaginative person and all that other stuff, he only writes out. He just takes his stories and they just get bigger and 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 bigger, and they never ever make that curve, which is why when they ran out of source material on the TV show, they were like, oh, wow, we didn't even notice that we have a billion trillion plot devices that we will never be able to, and then you get these stupid decisions like, oh, well, if we wave a magic wand here and have this stupid thing happen here, then, oh, look, that solves all these things. But it's not good storytelling. So, and that's why most people are very dissatisfied with, once they ran out of source material.
Yeah.
I empathize with the very difficult task that they had ahead of them.
I empathize with their difficult task as well, but they were paid a lot of money, and bad decisions were made. Bad decisions were made.
Bad decisions were made.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that is a good wrap for overcoming plot thinning and plot thickening and going too far. Where you want to be is the Goldilocks zone of plot, where your scenes all contribute to your theme or to your character development or to both, without launching into separate side plots that in no way, shape, or form contribute to your North Star.
You don't want to give too much. You don't want to have too much stuff that you're wading through, too many different side arcs, too many different, jokes and, that you've gone off because and this is where the problem comes into, I see all the time, where it's like my character's in a bar, but you know what? That bartender's really interesting. So after the character leaves, I'm going to write a chapter of just the bartender doing his thing because so interesting.
Yeah, no, don't do that.
No. If you want to write a story about that bartender, then write a story about that bartender as a separate story. Like, do that
as a separate story.
But that has nothing to do with your character story. You said it great when you said it's a balancing act. It's the Goldilocks zone. Too little, not good enough. Too much, not good enough. Like, you've got to get, it's got to be just right.
And on that note, thank you for listening, guys. We will see you soon. Hi, guys. This is Marie from Releasing Your Inner Dragon, and I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If you're interested in more content on fantasy world building, head over to YouTube and look up Just in Time Worlds. I release tons of content there. If you'd like to check out my book, The Hidden Blade by Marie M. Mullaney, it is available as an ebook, audiobook, and print book on Amazon. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.
Hey guys, Drake here. Thank you so much for listening to Releasing Your Inner Dragon podcast. I hope you're getting a ton of information and maybe even some nuggets of gold that you can take into your own writing to help you on your journey of story creation. A couple things I want to throw at you. First of all, for the first time in years, I am opening myself up to being a private mentor again. If you would like for me to work with you to improve your writing right now, reach out to me. You can either go to my website, maxwellalexanderdrake.com, and send me a contact form, or just email me at author@maxadrake.com. Also, as many of you may know, I've been out of the novel game for quite a few years. I was the lead fiction writer for EverQuest Next from Sony. I've been in the movie and TV industry for a few years now, but I am excited to say I'm back into the novel game. I've actually been working on a novel for a little while now, and I'm going to start dropping it on Amazon's Zavella. So if you're on that platform, look me up, Maxwell Alexander Drake. Thank you again for listening, and as always, keep writing.